Airport manager mocks black man's ID, instantly regrets it when he calls the aviation board. In the bustling heart of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, tensions rise when a seemingly routine ID check spirals into a fiery confrontation. What starts as an ordinary travel day for Winston Carter, a respectful, soft-spoken black man, becomes a powder keg of racial bias when the airport's manager belittles his identification and his very dignity. Passers-by stare, employees mutter in hushed tones, and Winston stands his ground, determined to defend himself. Little does that arrogant manager know, Winston has powerful connections with the Federal Aviation Administration. In mere moments, a single phone call will set in motion a chain of events that no one saw coming. The day began as any other at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Airplanes roared overhead, navigating a network of terminals as ticket counters hummed with the chatter of flight announcements. Families and business travelers zigzagged through the concourses, steered by the signs that glowed overhead. Yet beneath the veneer of everyday bustle lay an undercurrent of stress tensions from delayed flights, and an overworked staff simmered just below the surface. Standing behind the ticket counter for Gate B12 was Logan Whitfield, the airport manager. At first glance, Logan appeared to be the epitome of a professional, crisp uniform, polished black shoes, and a commanding presence that made him stand taller than his average height. He prided himself on efficiency, order, and what he called respect for the uniform. But behind that facade lurked an undercurrent of prejudice and a deep-seated frustration he had never learned to manage. Logan had a long list of responsibilities, supervising gate agents, ensuring the safety procedures were followed, and making sure security lines didn't clog up during rush hours. That morning had been a minefield of complications, lost baggage reports, a pilot shortage, and a surprise visit from a TSA regional director. By 10:00 a.m., Logan's temples throbbed from tension. He skimmed the daily operational report, barking orders at junior staffers who scattered like frightened birds whenever he approached. One of those staffers, Maria Jenkins, a kind-hearted gate agent with a perpetual smile, whispered among her peers that Logan had begun the day in an especially foul mood. She didn't know the particulars, but a rumor circulated that Logan had argued with his boss over budget cuts. Another rumor claimed he was dealing with personal issues at home. Whatever the case, his tolerance was low and his temper was high. Amid all these swirling stresses, an unsuspecting passenger named Winston Carter stepped into the terminal. Winston was traveling for a family matter. His beloved aunt in Houston had recently been hospitalized, and he was determined to reach her as soon as possible. Born and raised in Atlanta, Winston was no stranger to Hartsfield-Jackson. He had navigated it countless times before, always with courtesy and patience. He dressed simply, well-worn jeans, a comfortable polo shirt, and tidy sneakers. While Winston might have appeared an ordinary traveler, he carried with him a story of resolve and perseverance that had guided him through life's roughest storms. He rolled his carry-on baggage toward the ticket counter, checking the time on his phone. His flight was scheduled to depart in 3 hours, plenty of time to check in, go through security, and perhaps even grab breakfast. As Winston approached, he noticed the unusual tension in the air. A hush fell over the gate agents when Logan snapped at a co-worker across the terminal for a minor oversight. "Good morning," Winston said gently, addressing Maria at the counter. "Good morning, sir," she replied, forcing a polite smile. "May I see your ID and ticket information, please?" Just as Winston handed his driver's license to Maria, Logan prowled closer, scanning the area. Something about Winston caught Logan's eye. Perhaps it was the easy confidence with which he moved, or the polite yet self-assured way he spoke. Logan had long held onto preconceived notions about who deserved to be at ease in his airport. Without waiting for Maria to finish her check, Logan interjected. "You're sure about that ID?" Logan asked curtly. He peered at Winston with a razor-like glare. "It's not one of those fake ones, is it?" Maria blinked in surprise, taken aback by her boss's unusual comment. "Sir, this is a valid driver's license." Logan snatched the ID from Maria's hand and held it up to the light, scrutinizing it. The overhead fluorescence glinted on the plastic. People in line exchanged nervous glances. Winston's stomach fluttered with an uneasy feeling. He had never been singled out like this at an airport check-in. Yes, he'd had the typical frustrations everyone experiences with travel, but this felt different, an interrogation without cause, laced with an unmistakable hostility. "Where are you from exactly?" Logan demanded, ignoring the address clearly printed on the license. His tone dripped with the insinuation that Winston must have come from somewhere suspicious. Winston furrowed his brow. "I'm from Atlanta. Been here my whole life," he answered, controlling the tremor in his voice. "Is there some sort of issue with my ID?" Logan looked at Winston's ID photo again. "We'll see about that," he muttered before handing it brusquely back to Maria. "Run it," he ordered, meaning he wanted her to cross-reference Winston's information in the passenger manifest. Maria's face flushed. She hated confrontation, and she had never witnessed her manager openly question someone's ID without cause. Yet she complied, typing Winston's details into the system. The computer beeped and swiftly confirmed Winston's validity as a passenger, listing his address, license number, and date of birth. Everything matched perfectly. "It all checks out," Maria told Logan, handing the ID back to Winston. "Sir, one apologize. You're good to go." Logan stared at Winston for a moment longer, as though searching for a flaw, a reason to escalate the situation. Winston met Logan's gaze, refusing to shrink under scrutiny. The stare down lasted just a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity to onlookers. Finally, with a dismissive wave of his hand, Logan moved away and began barking at another staff member about a separate issue. Winston exhaled, a mixture of relief and indignation swirling inside him. He noticed a few curious travelers staring, but most had returned to their busy routines. Maria returned his documents with an apologetic whispered apology. "I'm so sorry about that," she said softly. "He's under a lot of pressure today, but that was uncalled for." Winston forced a small smile. "Thanks for your help. It's all right," he said, though he knew deep down it was not all right. Such hostility wasn't just about a stressed airport manager. It felt personal. Tucking his ID and boarding pass into his wallet, Winston headed toward security, leaving Maria watching him with regret in her eyes. That moment marked the beginning of a day Winston would never forget, nor would Logan. Winston Carter grew up in a modest Atlanta neighborhood, raised by parents who believed that hard work, kindness, and honesty were life's cornerstones. His mother taught at a nearby elementary school, often staying after hours to tutor underprivileged students, while his father dutifully worked at the local post office, never missing a shift in over 2 decades. From them, Winston learned that a good life had less to do with wealth or prestige and more to do with compassion and resilience. Even as a child, Winston exhibited a calm confidence that set him apart. If a conflict arose among his classmates, he was often the one to broker peace, listening intently to both sides and striving for fairness. Teachers noticed his knack for problem-solving in all areas, whether it was helping to reorganize books in the library or providing clear instructions during group projects. Over time, this skill blossomed into a love for engineering, pushing him to explore how everyday systems worked. Upon graduating high school with honors, Winston enrolled at Georgia Tech, where he majored in mechanical engineering. Balancing rigorous coursework with part-time jobs, he had little time for social events. Yet Winston still found moments to volunteer at local youth centers, teaching math and science to kids who reminded him of his younger self. Those volunteer hours cemented his belief in uplifting others, a personal mission inspired by his parents' lifelong commitment to service. During his college years, Winston crossed paths with Marcus Thompson, an older student who dreamed of flying commercial jets. Their friendship grew, forged by shared study sessions and mutual respect. When Marcus eventually joined the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, after a successful stint as a pilot, Winston kept in touch. Their bond extended beyond casual friendship. There was mutual admiration, Winston for Marcus's discipline and love of flight, and Marcus for Winston's willingness to stand up for people in need. After graduating, Winston landed a position at a boutique engineering firm that specialized in sustainable solutions, focusing on environmentally friendly designs for local businesses. His supervisors praised his diligence and creativity, yet it was his integrity that truly set him apart. Where others might cut corners to meet deadlines, Winston remained steadfast in his ethics, even if it meant working late into the night. Over time, he developed a wide-ranging network of peers and mentors who appreciated his unyielding sense of fairness. Many colleagues noticed that Winston never seemed rattled by workplace politics or unexpected setbacks. That wasn't because he lacked ambition, rather. He believed that genuine respect and clear communication could solve most problems. When he learned his aunt in Houston had fallen ill, Winston wasted no time booking a flight to be at her side. For him, loyalty was never optional. He arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport that morning with a single purpose: to see his aunt. Little did he know that a routine check-in would challenge both his composure and his faith in the system he had always respected, and that the friend he'd made in college would soon play a decisive role in setting things right. Logan Whitfield's childhood in a small town near Macon, Georgia, shaped his hunger for authority. His father, a local police officer, expected unwavering obedience at home, while his mother, a homemaker, instilled the belief that respect for authority was paramount. As a teenager, Logan yearned to break free from small-town limitations. He fantasized about attending a prestigious military academy or earning a scholarship to a top-ranked university, confident that a position of power awaited him if only he could escape the narrow confines of home. Those dreams, however, failed to materialize. Logan's grades were good but not stellar, and his family's finances could not cover out-of-state tuition or costly prep schools. Resentful, Logan enrolled in a nearby state college, an option he considered far below his aspirations. To make ends meet, he took a part-time security job at the local airport. Initially, he viewed the position as a stepping stone, but something about the controlled environment of runways, checkpoints, and strict protocols appealed to him in a way nothing else had. He found he thrived in situations where rules were rigid and authority was respected without question. Donning his security uniform gave him a sense of importance he had never experienced before. Over time, he convinced himself that he was born for leadership in a highly structured setting. After earning his college degree, he moved to Atlanta and secured a job in logistics at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. His diligence and willingness to enforce regulations without mercy caught the attention of his superiors. Logan climbed the ranks, eventually landing the role of airport manager for one of Hartsfield-Jackson's major terminals. In this capacity, he supervised gate agents, ground crew, and various support staff, a position that fed his craving for control. While some co-workers respected his efficiency, many found him overbearing, if not outright intimidating. His penchant for strict discipline left little room for empathy, and the staff turnover rate in his department soared. To Logan, high turnover simply meant weeding out the weak links. He believed that maintaining an iron grip on daily operations was essential, even if it meant stepping outside the usual protocols. If a passenger seemed suspicious in his eyes, he would intervene personally, occasionally bypassing TSA or airline procedures. He justified these actions as protecting airport security, but few who worked closely with him were convinced. At home, Logan's personal life offered no solace. His marriage dissolved after a few turbulent years, which he blamed on his ex-wife's inability to appreciate his commitment to order. The truth was more complicated. He refused to relinquish any control, leaving no space for compromise or warmth. When he poured all his energy into his job, it only intensified his domineering tendencies at work. By the time Winston Carter crossed his path, Logan was already teetering on the brink. He had alienated many of his subordinates and attracted attention from higher-ups for his questionable tactics. Yet he remained oblivious to the fact that a single confrontation with the wrong passenger could unravel everything. Unbeknownst to Logan, that moment was rapidly approaching one that would challenge not only his authority, but the entire structure he had painstakingly constructed around himself. After that tense exchange at the check-in counter, Winston tried to refocus. He reminded himself he was there for a serious reason, to see his hospitalized aunt. He couldn't afford to be delayed or miss his flight. Still, the confrontation with Logan weighed heavily. In the security line, Winston replayed the manager's words in his head. "It's not one of those fake ones, is it?" As if Winston had no right to be there unless proven otherwise. He passed through the standard security procedures without incident, though he noticed a few agents glance at him more than usual. Possibly alerted by Logan, Winston pretended not to notice. He retrieved his belongings, shoes, belt, laptop from the bins, and stepped away from the TSA checkpoint. Ahead of him, the terminal stretched in all directions, a hive of travelers hurrying to gates, restaurants, and restrooms. With 2 hours left before boarding, Winston considered getting coffee. But he was still too rattled to enjoy a casual beverage. Instead, he found a seat in a relatively quiet waiting area near his gate. As he settled down, he texted his cousin in Houston for updates on his aunt's condition. The response was guarded. "She's stable, but the doctors are still running tests." Winston sighed, murmuring a quick prayer for her recovery. Time in an airport can drag or race, depending on one's state of mind. For Winston, the minutes moved slowly. Every time he glimpsed a uniformed airport official, anxiety tugged at him, prompting flashbacks of Logan's accusatory stare. He told himself to stay calm, that it was a one-off incident, but a voice inside him doubted that. The memory of Logan's authority-laden voice, dismissive and belittling, refused to fade. Then, to Winston's utter dismay, Logan appeared again. The manager seemed to be making rounds through the terminal, flanked by 2 staff members. He paused at intervals to address any operational concerns. Winston's pulse quickened as Logan drew near his seating area. Instinctively, Winston looked away, hoping to avoid another confrontation. But luck was not on Winston's side. Logan spotted him and changed course, heading straight for Winston. The manager's expression was unreadable, but Winston braced for trouble. A hush fell around them as a few travelers noticed the tension in Logan's stride. "Sir," Logan said tersely, "I need to see your boarding pass again." Winston stood, placing his phone in his pocket. "I already showed my ID and boarding pass at check-in," he replied, struggling to keep his voice calm. "Is there an issue?" "We need to verify something," Logan said, offering no further explanation. Winston considered refusing, but he didn't want a scene or, worse, a flight delay. So he handed over the boarding pass. Logan scanned it, then scrutinized Winston's face again, as if searching for some discrepancy. The staff members behind Logan shifted uncomfortably, aware their boss was veering into unprofessional territory. "Everything's in order, right?" Winston asked, after a few tense seconds. "Yes," Logan said curtly, returning the pass. "But I'll be keeping an eye on you. Don't leave the gate area." Those words made Winston's jaw tighten. He fought the urge to demand why Logan felt such suspicion. Instead, Winston took a slow breath. "Is there any specific reason you're singling me out?" he asked, in as level a tone as possible. Logan's gaze hardened. "I'm not singling anyone out. I have the authority to check any passenger's documents. If you have a problem, you can speak to airline customer service." Winston realized the futility of further argument. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Logan lingered a moment longer, as though waiting for Winston to protest. When Winston didn't, Logan huffed and turned away, leading his staff members down the corridor. A wave of anger and humiliation washed over Winston. He could hear the low murmurs of people who had witnessed the exchange, some sounding sympathetic, others merely curious. Winston's first impulse was to contact a supervisor or file a complaint with the airline. But would that help? Logan was the manager. Even if Winston lodged a complaint, who knew if it would amount to anything? His mind drifted to Marcus Thompson, his old friend at the FAA. Marcus had once told Winston that while major issues typically involved airline compliance and safety, the FAA also took note of discriminatory practices reported by travelers, especially if they occurred in a pattern. The question was, did Winston want to escalate this? Could it create more trouble for him today? And yet, he couldn't just sit there and accept this blatant targeting without doing anything. Finally, Winston decided to at least document what had happened. He opened a note on his phone and typed the details: date, time, Logan's name, the interactions. He snapped a quick photo of the manager from a distance. As well, nothing too invasive, just enough to confirm his identity and uniform. Winston stored this information, uncertain of his next move, but unwilling to let the matter slide. When boarding time approached, Winston lined up at the gate. Maria was there, looking flustered but relieved to see him again. She whispered an apology as she scanned his boarding pass, and Winston nodded to show he didn't blame her. Stepping onto the jet bridge, Winston exhaled a quiet sigh of relief, hoping this would be the end of the ordeal. But as fate would have it, the drama was just beginning. Winston settled into his seat near the front of the aircraft, stowing his carry-on in the overhead compartment. He fastened his seatbelt and tried to shift his focus to his aunt, silently praying for her health. Outside the window, airport vehicles shuttled around, luggage carts loaded and unloaded, and ground crew signaled to each other with neon wands. He took out his phone for a moment, double-checking that it was set to airplane mode. A part of him still burned from the earlier confrontation. He reread the notes he had taken, a mixture of anger and disbelief twisting inside him. He wondered if calling Marcus would be the right step. Did he really want to involve the FAA in what might be considered a minor incident? Yet he couldn't ignore the blatant disrespect he'd just experienced. Discrimination wasn't always a violent act. Sometimes it was a slow drip of insults and doubts, eroding one's dignity over time. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration, the usual monotony of seatbelt instructions and oxygen mask placements. Winston tried to pay attention, but his mind was elsewhere. He felt his phone vibrate briefly in his pocket, probably a last text before the signal cut off. He ignored it for now, deciding to keep his focus on the present. Just as the plane began to back away from the gate, a swirl of commotion erupted in the cabin. Winston looked up to see the purser, lead flight attendant, hurrying down the aisle toward him. Behind her stood Logan, flanked by a member of the airport security team. They pointed in Winston's direction. "Sir, we need you to step off the plane," Logan said, his tone devoid of any courtesy. A jolt of disbelief shot through Winston. "Why?" he managed. "I have reason to believe there's an irregularity with your ticket," Logan announced loudly, ignoring the other passengers who watched with alarm. Passengers began whispering among themselves, eyes darting from Logan to Winston. The tension spiked. Winston felt his face grow hot. He had done everything by the book, checked in, gone through security, boarded properly. This could only be more harassment. "I've already confirmed my ID and ticket at the gate," Winston said firmly. "You've checked it twice. This is a matter of safety protocol," Logan insisted. "If you don't comply, we'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement." Winston glanced at the flight attendant. She appeared unsure, looking between the manager and Winston. She didn't want to escalate the conflict, but also felt pressured by Logan's authority. The mention of law enforcement made Winston's stomach churn. He knew how quickly situations could spiral if police were involved. Moreover, he was desperate to get to Houston to be with his aunt. "I'll step off," Winston conceded, unbuckling his seatbelt with trembling hands. "But I want a valid explanation." Logan didn't respond. He simply turned and led the way down the aisle, forcing Winston to follow in humiliated silence. Nervous stares and murmurs trailed after him. As Winston passed row after row of passengers, he felt a deep sense of injustice. This had escalated far beyond a mere ID check. Once they reached the jet bridge, the door closed behind them. The plane was now sealed, and Winston was officially off his flight. Logan gestured for the security officer to join them. Maria was there too, looking distressed. "All right," Winston said, refusing to hide his frustration. "Tell me what this is about." Logan crossed his arms. "I was informed that your ticket might have been purchased with a stolen credit card." Maria let out a small gasp. "That's not true," she said. "Everything matched his ID." Logan ignored her. "We take such matters very seriously," he continued, practically spitting out the words. "Until we verify the payment method used for this ticket, you won't be allowed to fly." "That's ridiculous," Winston retorted, voice shaking with controlled anger. "I use my own card, and I have the receipt in my email. Check my booking record, whatever you need." "You already did that at check-in," Logan shrugged, maintaining a mask of indifference. "We have to follow protocol. If you'd like to file a complaint or provide additional proof, you're welcome to do so at the ticketing desk." "That plane," he added, with a smug tilt of his head, "is leaving." Winston's world slowed. He imagined his aunt lying in a hospital bed in Houston. He saw the plane, preparing to taxi away from the gate, and all because of Logan's unsubstantiated claim of a stolen credit card. Winston felt the tears of frustration prick at his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Maria, stepping forward, pleaded quietly, "Sir, this passenger is obviously legitimate. I checked everything myself. Maybe this is a misunderstanding." Logan's face hardened. "Are you questioning my judgment?" An uncomfortable silence followed. The security officer shifted awkwardly, glancing between Winston and Logan, seemingly unsure whom to believe. Winston reached into his wallet and pulled out the credit card he had used. "Here," he said, showing it to the security officer. "This is the card. Charge a test fee if you must. I can show you my bank app. Anything. Let's resolve this quickly." Logan snatched the card and handed it to the security officer. "Check it thoroughly," he ordered. Then he turned to Winston, a sneer edging his lips. "We'll see if you're telling the truth." Winston waited, every second feeling like an hour. As the security officer made a quick call, the tension coiled inside Winston's chest. The officer relayed the card information, presumably verifying it with the airline's or bank's system. After a few moments, the officer returned, exhaling a breath as he handed the card back. "The card is valid," he reported. "Everything checks out. No stolen information here." Winston fought the urge to glare. Instead, he looked at Logan with quiet intensity. "Well?" he asked, voice trembling with contained anger. "You made me miss my flight." Logan shrugged, refusing to apologize. "If you hurry, maybe you can catch a later one. I'm just doing my job. Winston felt an eruption of rage boiling inside him, but he tempered it. He recognized that losing control now would only work against him. Instead, he nodded curtly, grabbed his card, and turned away. Maria tried to stop him. "I can help you get on the next flight," she offered. "I'll see if there's a seat." Winston placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly. "But first, I need to make a phone call." Logan raised an eyebrow. "Suit yourself," he said dismissively. "Just remember, we'll be watching." Winston said nothing more. He walked down the jet bridge, feeling the heat of humiliation burning in his face. But his thoughts were cold, focused. If Logan wanted to watch, Winston would give him something worth watching, a formal investigation. The time for letting things slide had passed. He pulled out his phone and found the contact for Marcus Thompson at the FAA. Fate had put this number in Winston's phone for a reason, and now it was time to use it. With his carry-on in tow, Winston made his way to a quiet seating area away from the main thoroughfare of Terminal B. Sweat glistened on his forehead. The emotional toll of the situation felt as heavy as the physical exhaustion. He sank into a vinyl chair, took a steadying breath, and dialed Marcus Thompson. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Winston," came the familiar voice, tinted with surprise. "It's been a while, man. Everything okay?" "Hey, Marcus," Winston replied, his voice subdued. "I wish I could say yes, but I'm at Hartsfield-Jackson, and I've just been through a pretty disturbing ordeal. I need your advice." Over the next few minutes, Winston recounted every detail: Logan's initial ID accusation, the second confrontation, being removed from the plane, and the false claim of a stolen credit card. Marcus listened intently, occasionally interjecting with a dismayed "wow" or "that's unacceptable." By the time Winston finished, his throat felt raw from the emotional strain. Marcus sighed. "That's blatant harassment, Winston. I've heard stories, but rarely this brazen. This manager basically used his authority to humiliate you." Winston nodded, though Marcus couldn't see it. "Exactly. And now I've missed my flight. I can probably catch a later one, but this needs to be addressed. I'm just not sure how. I have a few contacts at the FAA who handle passenger rights and discrimination complaints," Marcus said. "We don't directly enforce every aspect of airport management that can be up to TSA or the specific airline, but if there's evidence of a pattern of discriminatory behavior, it definitely catches the FAA's interest. We coordinate with the Department of Transportation on these issues." Winston exhaled a shaky breath. "I documented what happened, took some notes, even grabbed a photo of the manager's badge." "Is that enough?" "That's a good start," Marcus affirmed. "If you're willing, you should file a formal complaint. I can help you direct it through the right channels. The FAA can't promise immediate disciplinary action against that manager, but your story will be on record. If others have complained or do in the future, your evidence will be crucial." Winston felt a wave of relief. Having Marcus guide him lessened the feeling of being alone in the fight. "Thank you," he said, emotion edging his voice. "That means a lot, of course. You might also consider talking to the airline involved. They can't be thrilled about an employee, even if he's an airport manager, going rogue and harassing passengers. This could open them up to a lawsuit if they don't handle it properly." "I'll think about it," Winston replied, glancing at his watch. "I also need to check if I can get on another flight soon. My aunt's in the hospital, and I have to get to Houston." Marcus's tone softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Look, Winston, do what you need to do in order to see your aunt. Once you're settled in Houston, email me every piece of documentation you have, photos, notes, everything. I'll make sure it lands on the right desks." Winston smiled, gratitude warming his voice. "Thanks, Marcus. The first owe you one." "Hey, we look out for each other," Marcus said simply. "Travel safely." And keep your head up, you did nothing wrong. Winston hung up, feeling as if he'd finally regained some measure of control over the situation. The pain of losing his seat on that flight still stung, but at least he had a next step. He rose from the chair and approached a nearby departure board. There was another Houston flight departing in 2 hours. If fate was kind, he'd managed to get a seat. And this time, he'd be on guard in case Logan tried anything else. He walked back toward the main concourse, passing Gate B12, the scene of his initial harassment. Maria was working the desk, her gaze filled with concern when she spotted him. Winston gave her a small wave, signaling that he bore no ill will. She waved back, looking somewhat reassured. Winston found his new flight at Gate 19 run by a different airline. He booked a seat using the airline's mobile app, paying a slightly higher fare for a last-minute ticket. Despite the cost, Winston felt it necessary anything to get to Houston as quickly as possible. As he waited at Gate 19, Winston couldn't help glancing over his shoulder every few minutes, half expecting Logan to appear with another spurious accusation. But the manager was nowhere to be seen. Winston allowed himself to breathe more freely. Maybe Logan had used up his cruelty for the day. Yet Winston's heart pounded with renewed purpose. He might not be able to force an immediate apology from Logan Whitfield, but he could hold him accountable in the long run. With the FAA on his side, Winston felt less like a victim and more like a man exercising his rights. He stared at his phone, seeing the background photo of his aunt and him at a family barbecue. Her warm smile reminded him why he needed to reach Houston. As soon as the boarding announcement for the next flight rang out, Winston stood up and joined the line. This time, no one questioned his ID, no one singled him out. He stepped onto the plane with a calm determination, mentally promising himself that Logan would regret his actions, one way or another. Once Winston arrived in Houston, he went straight to the hospital. The relief of seeing his aunt alive and stable momentarily overshadowed the airport debacle. He spent the next day by her bedside, holding her hand through medical tests and waiting with family members for any signs of improvement. Yet, even in that emotional environment, the memory of Logan's harassment wouldn't fade. It nagged at Winston like a dark cloud. When his aunt finally showed encouraging signs of recovery, Winston felt able to step away for a few hours. He returned to the small hotel room he'd booked near the hospital and powered up his laptop. True to his promise, Marcus had emailed him detailed instructions on how to file a complaint with the FAA and the Department of Transportation's Aviation Consumer Protection Division. Winston read through each step carefully. He compiled the evidence: 1. Written account, a thorough timeline of every interaction with Logan Whitfield, from the check-in counter to his forced removal from the plane. 2. Photo of Logan, taken in the terminal, showing his name tag and uniform. 3. Boarding pass and confirmation emails, demonstrating Winston's legitimate purchase and seat assignment. 4. Credit card statement, verifying the ticket purchase was made with his own funds. Winston also wrote a heartfelt letter, highlighting how the discrimination made him feel and how it directly impacted his travel plans, causing him distress and additional expenses. With each keystroke, Winston felt both anger and resolve. No one, no matter their job title, had the right to treat him like a criminal. That evening, Winston sent the complaint package to Marcus, who forwarded it to the appropriate contacts at the FAA. Marcus had also mentioned that if Winston wanted to file a separate complaint with the airline, he could. Winston decided to do so. He emailed the airline's customer service department, explaining the situation in detail. He emphasized that while the manager appeared to be an airport authority, the airline should at least be aware of how their passengers were being treated. Days passed. Winston juggled hospital visits, family responsibilities, and periodic calls with Marcus. The FAA's wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, but they had begun to turn. According to Marcus, initial reviews of Winston's case raised eyebrows, especially since the manager's behavior had no apparent justification. If there were other similar incidents involving Logan, Winston's testimony could prove damning. Back in Atlanta, Logan went about his daily routine, blissfully unaware that a formal investigation was underway. He continued his role as airport manager, scolding employees for minor infractions and patrolling the terminals for any passenger who dared to breach his sense of order. If a complaint had been filed, Logan figured he had enough connections and seniority to wriggle out of trouble. But small tremors of concern began to appear. Rumors swept among airport staffers that some bigwig from the FAA had contacted the upper management of Hartsfield-Jackson. Logan noticed that in the weekly operational meeting, the airport's general manager, Leslie Carter, no relation to Winston, seemed unusually quiet when Logan presented his departmental report. Moreover, Logan caught wind of a request from the Department of Transportation for passenger complaint records. For the first time in his career, he felt a twinge of vulnerability. About 2 weeks after Winston's ordeal, an official letter arrived at the airport's administrative office, addressed to Logan Whitfield. It came from the FAA's Office of Civil Rights and Passenger Advocacy. The letter requested a formal interview with Logan and asked him to provide any documentation related to the incident with passenger Winston Carter on the specified date and flight. It also asked Logan to confirm whether any internal procedures were followed or documented. Logan read the letter twice, heat creeping across his neck. He realized this was more serious than he'd thought. He set the letter aside, telling himself he had nothing to fear. He'd spin the situation as a routine security concern. He'd claim that Winston's behavior was suspicious, that he was only ensuring safety. After all, who would dare question the airport manager's judgment? Yet, behind Logan's bluster, the first seeds of doubt sprouted. He knew he had no legitimate documentation supporting his claim that Winston's credit card was stolen. He had initiated that confrontation out of pure malice, fueled by anger and bias. If the FAA uncovered this truth, Logan's career could be in jeopardy. Rather than warn his superiors or legal department, Logan decided to keep the letter under wraps for the time being. He reasoned that the less attention he brought to the situation, the better. Maybe the complaint would fizzle out, maybe Winston wouldn't pursue it further, maybe the investigation would stall in bureaucracy. What Logan didn't realize was that Winston's complaint had reached sympathetic ears, people who believed in accountability. Marcus's connections gave Winston's case a spotlight most complaints never see. The investigation would not be quietly brushed aside. As the days turned to weeks, Winston's aunt made a slow but steady recovery. With her health stabilized, Winston returned to Atlanta. Stepping off the plane at Hartsfield-Jackson, he felt a swirl of emotions: relief to be home, anxiety over the investigation, and a lingering sense of indignation. Every corner of that massive airport reminded him of Logan's searing stare, but Winston kept his composure. He'd done his part, filing complaints through the proper channels. Now, he had to trust the process, even if it was slow and fraught with red tape. In the meantime, he returned to his engineering job, resuming his usual responsibilities, but carrying an undercurrent of tension. At night, he checked his emails, hoping for updates from Marcus or the FAA. Each day that passed without new information frayed his nerves. He worried that the investigation might stall, or that Logan would lie his way out of accountability. Then, one evening, an email arrived from an FAA official named Carolyn Heath. She requested a phone interview with Winston to corroborate details he'd provided in his written statement. Winston immediately replied, agreeing to any time that worked for her. The next afternoon they spoke for nearly an hour, with Carolyn asking pointed questions about everything from the tone of Logan's voice to the presence of any witnesses. When Winston hung up, he felt both drained and hopeful. He had answered candidly, backing his story with facts and emotional truth. Carolyn seemed professional, but also empathetic. She apologized for Winston's ordeal and assured him the FAA took such allegations seriously. After the call, Winston realized that a turning point had come. The investigation was in full swing. Evidence was being gathered, interviews were being conducted, and official records were being scrutinized. Across town, Logan would soon find himself under intense scrutiny he never anticipated. And, for Winston, there was comfort in knowing that, for once, a man abusing his power might not escape the consequences. Logan's troubles began subtly: an unusual request for a meeting here, a carefully worded email there. Then came the internal communications from the airport's legal team, requesting that Logan compile all relevant incident reports from the date in question. The problem was, Logan hadn't filed any incident reports regarding Winston Carter's situation. He had relied on intimidation, not documentation. When Logan failed to provide the requested reports, the legal team escalated the matter to the airport's top brass. Next thing Logan knew, he was summoned to a conference room on the top floor of the administrative building. The meeting included the airport's general manager, Leslie Carter, the director of human resources, and a representative from the airport's legal counsel. "We've received correspondence from the FAA regarding a discrimination complaint against you," Leslie began, her tone measured. "They're asking for detailed records." Logan sat stiffly, his palms beginning to sweat. "Yes, I got a letter from them. I responded that I'd look into it." Leslie raised an eyebrow. "That was 2 weeks ago, Logan. Why didn't you alert us?" I wanted to handle it. It's a misunderstanding," Logan stammered. "This passenger was suspicious. I was ensuring safety." The HR director, a sharp-eyed woman named Cynthia Hayes, slid a document across the table. "According to your staff, the passenger's credentials checked out. You also removed him from a flight under false pretenses of a stolen credit card." "Where is the supporting documentation?" Logan fumbled. "The situation was hectic. Cynthia continued, "Failing to file an incident report is a breach of our protocol, Logan, and you acted outside the scope of your authority by removing that passenger. Flight security concerns typically go through the airline and TSA, not an airport manager acting on his own hunch." As Logan tried to muster a defense, the airport's lawyer chimed in. "The FAA also received a statement from multiple witnesses, including one of your staff members who stated you singled out this passenger without cause. We have reason to believe that personal bias was involved." Logan's mouth went dry. He sensed the walls closing in, but clung to the idea he could still bluff his way through. "I maintain that the passenger was acting suspiciously. Perhaps my staff misunderstood my intentions." Leslie leaned back in her chair, eyes cold. "We're launching an internal investigation. You'll remain in your position for now, but your responsibilities will be limited, and you must cooperate fully. The FAA will be conducting interviews as well." Logan's heart pounded. "With all due respect, I've served this airport for years, ensuring top-notch security. I deserve more trust than this." "You will be treated fairly," Leslie said, "but we have zero tolerance for discrimination. We'll see what the investigation uncovers." Over the next few days, Logan endured a barrage of questioning from various committees. He tried to downplay the incident, portraying it as standard procedure. But each time he spoke, he sensed the investigators' skepticism. Too many details contradicted his narrative: the gate agent's testimony, Winston's boarding documentation, The fact that the credit card was verified as valid within minutes. Tension brewed among the staff. Some employees, especially those who had once feared Logan's wrath, quietly rejoiced that he might finally face consequences. Others tried to remain neutral, not wanting to risk retaliation if Logan somehow survived the ordeal. Maria Jenkins, the gate agent, was one of those called in to testify. She recounted exactly what happened, that Winston's ID and ticket were in perfect order, and that Logan had no grounds to question him repeatedly. As the internal investigation progressed, word spread that the FAA was conducting its own parallel inquiry. Rumors flew that an FAA official was flying in from Washington to interview key players, including Logan. The manager's confidence wavered. He could no longer spin half-truths or rely on personal alliances to shield him. The scrutiny was external and official. At home, Logan's stress manifested in sleepless nights and heated arguments with his girlfriend. He raged about overly sensitive passengers and politically correct airport policy. He insisted he was a victim of a smear campaign, but deep down, a cold dread told him he'd crossed the line. It was no longer a question of if he would face consequences, but when. The airport's attorney advised Logan to prepare a written statement and show remorse. Logan refused, believing an admission of guilt would be career suicide. Instead, he stuck to his guns, claiming he'd done nothing wrong. Yet each day, new pieces of evidence emerged that contradicted his version of events. He found himself cornered, his usual tactics of intimidation useless against a formal investigation. Meanwhile, Winston kept in touch with Marcus. The FAA official, Carolyn Heath, reached out to Winston again, confirming she had interviewed several Hartsfield-Jackson employees who corroborated Winston's story. Winston listened, relief warring with a lingering sense of outrage. A small part of him worried that, even with all the evidence, someone like Logan might slip through the cracks. But Carolyn assured him that the seriousness of the allegations meant they would not turn a blind eye. As the net tightened around Logan, the dynamic at the airport shifted. People no longer scurried away in fear when he walked by. Some staff members openly avoided him, worried about being associated with a manager under investigation. Others quietly discussed potential replacements, speculating who might take over if Logan were demoted or fired. Logan felt the isolation acutely. The more he tried to assert his authority, the more he realized it was slipping away. Like a child who had cried wolf one too many times, no one was listening. The primal force that had once fueled his ambition now threatened to devour him. And with each passing day, it became clearer that Winston Carter's complaint wasn't going to fade into bureaucratic oblivion. Instead, it was a lightning rod, illuminating every dark corner of discrimination and abuse of power in Logan's reign at the airport. The official hearing took place in a nondescript conference room near the airport's administrative offices. Although it was not a public trial, the attendees felt its gravity. Representatives from Hartsfield-Jackson's upper management were present, along with the airport's legal counsel, 2 FAA officials including Carolyn Heath and a human resources observer. Logan Whitfield, dressed in his uniform, sat stiffly at a long table, eyes flicking across the room as though seeking an escape route. Winston Carter had been invited to give testimony. The thought of seeing Logan again made Winston uneasy, but he knew it was necessary. He arrived dressed in business casual attire, nerves coiled. Marcus Thompson was also present as an unofficial FAA liaison, offering moral support and bridging any technical gaps. Leslie Carter, the airport's general manager, opened the proceedings. "We're here to address the serious complaint of discriminatory conduct against Mr. Logan Whitfield, involving passenger Winston Carter on date The FAA has requested a joint hearing to resolve the matter. Carolyn Heath took the floor next, her voice steady. We have collected witness statements and documentation. The evidence suggests Mr. Whitfield singled out Mr. Carter without reasonable cause, subjected him to repeated document checks, and ultimately removed him from a flight under a false claim. We'd like to hear from the involved parties directly. The questioning began with Winston. He recounted the events methodically, his voice occasionally trembling from the memory of that humiliating day. He described how Logan had questioned his ID, singled him out in the terminal, and forced him off the plane on the pretext of a stolen credit card. With measured composure, Winston detailed the emotional toll and the inconvenience it caused, including missed flights and additional expenses. Carolyn asked clarifying questions, ensuring they captured every nuance. Next, Logan was given the opportunity to present his side. He cast frequent glances at Winston, as if measuring how much he could get away with. "I acted in good faith," Logan claimed. "I received a tip from one of my staff that the passenger's ID and credit card might be fraudulent. I was obligated to investigate." Carolyn arched an eyebrow. "Which staff member gave you this tip?" Logan hesitated. I don't recall exactly. It was a busy day." Cynthia Hayes from HR took note. "We interviewed multiple staff members, and none corroborated your claim. Care to explain?" Logan's face reddened. "They might be afraid to speak up. I can't control what they say. All I know is I was following standard procedure." "Is it standard procedure to remove a passenger from a flight without filing a formal incident report?" The airport's attorney pressed. Logan swallowed. "I made a judgment call. Sometimes you have to act decisively, then file reports later." Carolyn's tone hardened. "Did you file a report at all after the fact?" Logan avoided her gaze. "No, I intended to, but got sidetracked. It's a high-pressure environment." Winston quietly watched, a mixture of anger and satisfaction swirling within him. The more Logan spoke, the more transparent his lies became. Marcus, seated nearby, offered Winston a reassuring nod. The hearing continued with testimony from Maria Jenkins, who recounted her role in checking Winston's ID and verifying everything was in order. She described how Logan intervened for no apparent reason, and how she felt pressured by his authoritative demeanor. Another gate agent confirmed Maria's account, stating they too saw no legitimate cause to suspect Winston's documents. Logan tried to pivot, painting Winston as uncooperative or belligerent. But the testimonies from staff and Winston himself painted a very different story. Winston had been polite, if understandably confused by the unwarranted scrutiny. Moreover, no witness could recall Winston behaving aggressively. Every claim Logan made lacked supporting evidence. After several hours of questioning and cross-examination, Leslie Carter adjourned the hearing, stating they needed time to deliberate. The participants filed out, leaving Logan in a silent swirl of dread. Winston emerged, feeling a weight lifted. He had spoken his truth, and the evidence was on his side. A week later, the official ruling was delivered in writing to all involved parties. The airport's management and the FAA concluded that Logan had acted improperly, violating both internal protocols and anti-discrimination guidelines. The letter stated that Logan was placed on indefinite suspension pending further disciplinary review, and that he might face termination if found guilty of further misconduct. Additionally, the FAA declared that Hartsfield-Jackson would be subject to closer oversight to ensure there wasn't a broader pattern of discrimination. For Winston, the letter served as validation that his efforts had not been in vain. When he received the news, he felt a complex flood of emotions: relief, vindication, and a lingering sadness that such a confrontation had ever occurred. He had only wanted to travel to see his sick aunt, yet found himself embroiled in a battle for his dignity. Now, at least, justice seemed to be prevailing. Logan, on the other hand, was furious. He considered appealing, hiring a lawyer, or going public with claims of a witch hunt. But his legal counsel advised him that with the overwhelming evidence against him, he risked further damaging his career and possible legal ramifications if he pressed on without grounds. Resentful, Logan retreated, his future uncertain. By the end of the month, the official word came down. Logan Whitfield was terminated from his role as airport manager. The public statement from Hartsfield-Jackson cited violation of discriminatory conduct policies and failure to follow established procedures. Word of Logan's fall from grace spread quickly among airport employees, many of whom felt the outcome was long overdue. Winston received a personal phone call from Leslie Carter, apologizing on behalf of the airport. She expressed regret for his ordeal and assured him that they were taking steps to prevent such incidents in the future. Winston appreciated the gesture. While it couldn't erase the humiliation he'd endured, it offered a glimmer of hope that change was possible. In the following weeks, Winston focused on returning to normal life. He found solace in knowing that his aunt's health continued to improve. And each time he recalled Logan's sneering face, Winston reminded himself that he had done what was right. He had stood up for himself and, in the process, upheld a principle larger than any single airport confrontation. For Logan, life after Hartsfield-Jackson was a bleak landscape of regret and resentment. With his termination came the immediate loss of his credentials and the professional respect he once commanded. Contacts he had in the aviation world distanced themselves, unsure whether they wanted to be associated with someone publicly accused of discrimination. A potential job offer at a regional airport in the Midwest evaporated when the prospective employer learned of Logan's history. No longer able to rely on the steady income of an airport manager, Logan found himself scouring job boards, competing against a younger, more qualified workforce. His once proud demeanor crumbled under financial strain and tarnished reputation. Rumors abounded that he might leave the aviation industry entirely, forced to take on a lesser role in a different field. But the hardest blow came from within. Late one night, Logan, alone and sleepless in his small apartment, was forced to confront the bitter truth. His own bigotry and thirst for control had led to his downfall. He had crossed a line he could never uncross, harming an innocent passenger and staining his own career. While Logan spiraled into self-pity, Winston moved forward. He remained at his engineering firm, quietly excelling in project after project. He never bragged about his role in toppling a biased airport manager, but word of it spread through friends and colleagues. People admired Winston for his courage and composure, and some even sought his advice on dealing with workplace discrimination. Reluctantly, Winston became a role model for those learning to stand up for their rights. Occasionally, Winston would pass through Hartsfield-Jackson for business travel. The airport felt different, like a weight had lifted. Gone was Logan's oppressive presence. Employees seemed more at ease. Winston never learned whether the airport's changes were solely due to the incident, but he sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Maybe it was just him, now carrying the confidence of a man who had spoken out and been heard. Months later, Winston received a call from Marcus Thompson. The FAA agent congratulated him on having the courage to file the complaint and see it through to the end. "Your case has been used as a training example," Marcus explained. "We want to show our staff how one person's testimony can root out systemic problems." Winston felt humbled. He thanked Marcus and reflected on how an ordinary journey to visit his sick aunt had become a watershed moment for accountability. Though Winston had never sought the spotlight, he recognized that sometimes fate chooses you to enact change. As for Logan, no one at Hartsfield-Jackson ever heard from him again. Some speculated he moved out of state, desperately seeking a fresh start. Others claimed he lingered in Atlanta, working odd jobs, bitterness gnawing at him. Regardless, the lesson was clear: mocking a passenger's ID, targeting someone because of prejudice, and abusing authority might yield short-term intimidation, but it could also unleash long-term repercussions that dismantle a career. In the end, the moral arc of the airport world bent toward justice. Winston remained, as he always was, humble, kind, and resolute in the face of adversity. And as he continued to visit family, attend conferences, and pass through airports large and small, he carried with him the unshakable truth: in a place where travelers come and go every hour, one person's stand can make all the difference. Thank you for following this journey of resilience, justice, and hard-earned vindication. Winston's story reminds us that no matter where we come from or where we're headed, our dignity travels with us. When an abuse of power collides with unwavering courage, the truth finds a way to prevail. We've seen how an ordinary flight became an extraordinary showdown, proving that each of us has the power to stand up against prejudice and shape a more equitable world. If this narrative resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with friends who believe in standing up against injustice, and subscribing to this channel for more stories of real people triumphing over adversity. Together, we can spread a message of hope and accountability, reminding everyone that change often begins with a single, brave voice. Safe travels wherever life takes you.